welcome everyone. We may get some more people join us a little bit later, but our whole purpose of these sessions is that we keep our audiences really small. The idea is that we are able to have a conversation with a really prominent, influential nurse leader. And I'm so thrilled that Carol Kefford's been able to spare the time to talk to us today, because I know the demands that she'll be under in her current role. So Carol, as you possibly already know, is Clinical Director and Chief Nurse at Nuffield Health. And we're going to have the opportunity to learn a little bit more about Carol, the person behind the CV. So Carol's got an amazing CV. Her achievements and accolades are just out of this world. But what we're interested in today is to learn a bit more about her journey, the challenges, some of the lessons learned along the way. So I'll start us off with some questions, but I'll invite you all in our audience to ask questions along. So if you want to either wave at me physically or put your hand up button on Zoom, I'll keep an eye out for that, and we'll be able to open it up to questions as and when people are ready to ask them. So huge welcome and thank you again, Carol.
It's a pleasure.
Could I ask you to start off for us, Carol, just telling us a bit about your journey, so your career through nursing that's brought you to this position at Nuffield Health?
Certainly, Gemma, and I'm hoping that it'll stand up to that introduction. Set the bar quite high there, but yeah, I feel I need to be really impressive. But Jen, it's good to see you. Well, I've had a mix of some bits have been really traditional and other bits have been anything but. So, should we say hello to our new joiner? Yeah. Oh, just taking a minute to connect there.
So I think you're here. Is it Fumi? Fumi? Hi there. Oh, you're on mute.
Hello, Fumi. It's nice to see you.
Hello, hi.
I've just been asked to introduce myself, Fumi. So I'm Carol. Oh,
okay.
And we've got somebody else there. That's great. You're all joining at just the right moment.
Okay.
Welcome. You go ahead, Carol.
So I just keep going. All right. So I've just been asked to talk about how I my career so far. So the very traditional bit was I started my nurse training in the NHS and did the usual staff nurse route, bit of medicine, bit of surgery, but of course that was a really long time ago. And then I joined the army. And although I know it's a Navy advert, but I do think I do reflect that I was kind of made in the British Army, and probably the most influential part of my career. I had a bit of an odd army career though, because I worked in recruitment and selection. Those of you who went through the through Westbury and RCB, you've got me to thank for that, because we didn't used to do that. We just used to do an interview. I had postings to Hong Kong and Nepal. Neither place can you get to now, but they were fab. And I was the first deputy matron at Frimley Park. So I hold those of you who work in the military unit there very dear to my heart. I remember the very painful early days of that, but what an experience. What else did I do? I ran recruit training for a while, and I ran officer training for a while. So none of this was anything to do with actual clinical care. But the good thing about the army, and I think it's probably the experience that military folk on the call are having, is you can be a nurse and you can be other things as well, and then you go back to nursing and you take from one into the other and into the other and into the other. And Fumi, I'm sure the same thing applies to you, that your experiences, you don't just grow as a nurse and as a nurse leader on the ward or in your clinical area, you grow in the rest of your life, don't you? And by transferring all those experiences. So I had this really interesting mix in the army that did add a lot to me as a nurse. Anyway, look, I left the army because my husband had left, and I was a bit tired of weekly commuting. I did it for 7 years. That's kind of, I felt I'd done my time. So a job just randomly came up in Oxford at Nuffield Health, and they were building a new hospital. So we were going from a 5-bedded, very ancient fireplaces, believe it or not, in every patient's bedroom, to a fabulous state-of-the-art critical care units, interventional cardiology, neurosurgery, the whole bit. So I had, again, really interesting experience of building a brand new hospital. Now, the previous hospital I'd built was 200 beds on an airfield in Norfolk. So, and that was, again, it's really interesting. There were experiences from that time in Thetford that I was calling on, and I found myself calling on when we were building, commissioning, and then opening this new hospital. But what was interesting then, I'm speaking to my military colleagues here a bit, so excuse me a moment, Fumi, but I was ready for a posting order. I was used to moving every 3.5 years. So after about 3.5 years, I started to get a bit kind of fidgety. And so I then moved to another role in Nuffield as an interim, and then ended up as a hospital director for a little while. So again, it just broadened me out. But I did it because I kind of fell into it. None of this is planned. I don't want any of you to think that I've had some kind of trajectory and plan. What I've done is grab opportunities when they were plonked in front of me. And quite often I've needed a bit of a shove, because I really didn't think I was up to being a hospital director. But funnily enough, I managed. So, and learned from that. But at this point, what I really, really wanted to do was go travelling. And my husband and I had bought a boat a few years earlier, and we thought, potter around the Mediterranean for a couple of years, do a bit of exploring, and see where that took us. Anyway, 40,000 miles later, having crossed the Atlantic and the Pacific and island hopped through French Polynesia and places like that, I was asked if I'd like to come back to Nuffield Health as chief nurse. And during the sailing years, I had taken a number of interim and short roles when I'd been back in the UK, because I really found I just didn't want to let go of the fact that I was a nurse. And isn't that interesting? When we set off, I thought nobody'd want me anymore. I've been living on the high seas. I can probably repair a diesel engine, but nobody is going to want me as a nurse anymore, because I'd be out of date. I could not have been more wrong. And one of my overriding memories is about 6 months after I gave up my registration, because I gave it up voluntarily, I started not sleeping, and it was as though I'd had some bit of me removed. Anyway, I re-registered, and I then spent the rest of my time travelling, making sure that I was putting enough hours in so that I could carry on re-registering. And I think that's really interesting, because I had not expected, I thought I was ready to stop nursing. Interesting. Anyway, I was asked if I was interested in applying. So I did. Thinking I couldn't possibly, but as my husband pointed out, you don't turn down a job you haven't been offered. So if somebody says, would you like to, are you interested? Just say yes. Every time, just say yes. And only turn it down when somebody's properly offered it to you. So, and that was good advice. So I came back to Nuffield as chief nurse. I hadn't got a clue what I was doing. But I gave it my best shot. I'd never been in a boardroom before. I'd never worked that closely at that higher level. But again, you know, I kind of just called on all these experiences when I'd faced the unknown before. And, you know, it's a different unknown each time, but somehow or other we muddle through and we get on with it. So that was, so I grew in confidence. Of course, I relied on my colleagues. My colleagues were incredibly kind and supportive, and I learned as I went, and I started to feel I was contributing rather than just taking all the time. Nuffield, you probably know, or you may not know, actually, those of you who live in the south, you may live near either a Nuffield Health gym, fitness and wellbeing centre, or you may live near one of our hospitals. So Guildford, Woking, we've got hospitals, we've got gyms in Farnham, Farnborough, so that may be what you're familiar with. But we brought the whole company together. So instead of running them as separate businesses, we also have a lot of corporate clients, about 200, where we do all the occupational health and in-house fitness and well-being and stuff. So then I found myself, and again, I didn't apply for anything here. This was no plan, but I then found myself as clinical director for the whole lot when we brought the whole lot together. And I've just carried on muddling through. Every so often I'm presented with something else to get hold of, and of course in March last year we were all presented, weren't we, with COVID-19 and the pandemic. And I think, like all of you, we had to completely change shape overnight, and that's been the main effort for the last getting on for a year now. It's very hard to believe. So that's it. Oh, and obviously I should mention that a couple of years ago, so I should talk about my education, my development. When I was in the army, I did my health service management degree. I did that with the RCN. I then did an MBA at Henley Business School, again, which the army supported me in doing. So that was very interesting to broaden my experience. And then a couple of years ago, I was really, really feeling stuck, that I didn't want to do another academic programme. I'm not naturally academic. I wanted to do something more experiential, more where I was learning from others and learning and being stretched by my peers. I didn't want to be sheep dipped into a course. And so that's why I applied for and was unbelievably fortunate to get the Senior Leader Scholarship with Florence Nightingale Foundation. And, you know, that has completely turbocharged me over the last couple of years. It's been phenomenal. And it's been phenomenal. And you'll have heard similar stories from the relationships that I've established through it. And it isn't just my immediate cohort, although we are still incredibly close and very supportive of each other, especially this year. Or it isn't just the people on the additional programs I did. So I did the Windsor Leadership Programme, and we've stayed very close, and we have Teams calls all the time. It isn't just that, it's the people I've met through them, and the people I've met through them and through them. So it really has this massive ripple effect. But, you know, as Gemma and Adam will know, it also takes effort from me. It's very, very interactive, and you really do get out what you put in. But I'm still reaping the benefits of it hugely. And you know, being able to have conversations like this is something that gives me a boost and a charge as well. And I always finish learning something. So does that cover it, Gemma, do you think?
Thank you so much. And I'm sure
quick slurp.
I've got so many questions to ask of you, and those of you that did arrive a little bit later, just to let you know, if you've not attended one of these sessions before, lots of opportunity for question, debate, conversation. So if you do have a question for Carol at any point, if you either put your hand up through Zoom or give me a wave if you've got your camera on, then I'll pose that question to her or invite you to do that. So, or pop it in the chat box, whatever you prefer. So I'll carry on, Carol, if that's okay for now, and invite others to chip in when they feel ready. We've had some really interesting conversations as we've gotten to know each other over the last few months about your view on how the private sector and the NHS can work together in relation to workforce issues. And I thought that would be something that others on the call would be interested to hear your views on that. For me, it's so refreshing to hear the perspective that you've got. Sure. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind sharing that for us.
No, be delighted. So this hopefully this won't be too much of a ramble, because I get very very energized by all of this. So, I mean, my time in the NHS and then in the army, I would look at the private sector and think, ooh, that's all, you know, it's what they do is the independent sector looks after posh rich people who just expect you to wait on them hand and foot. I thought that it wasn't proper nursing because nobody was that sick. I thought that it would be career suicide. And I thought a whole pile of other stuff that you hear all the time, until I got closer, and I then started to understand a lot more about the number of NHS patients the independent sector looks after, that it is a very meaningful career with fantastic development. And I've ended up really quite an advocate for a health system rather than different sections. And I think, that this isn't me being in any way clever, that we have health systems rather than having primary care, secondary care, social care, and so on and so on. And I'd really like to see the independent sector having a recognised and proper part to play in that more clearly. So it happens informally, it's not really happening formally yet. So, all of our hospitals have amazing relationships with their local NHS trust, and we share. And one of the huge benefits of the pandemic, if there's got to be some positives coming out of this, is that it has brought the independent sector and the NHS closer together on a lot more levels. So they may have been reasonably close at the commissioning level, for example, but now we're much closer all the way through. So couple of stories, and wave 3, this is horrible, isn't it? This is really, really horrible. So over the course of a last weekend, in Ipswich, the oncology service just lifted up from the trust and moved into our hospital. And we've got the operating theatres converted for something, we've got outpatients converted for something else. So the NHS have moved in. We're now working alongside our NHS colleagues, but that means that there's too many of us. So a cohort of our nurses and ODPs have moved into the trust and are working alongside their colleagues in the trust. We have in Plymouth, in the first wave round, the minor injuries unit from Derriford moved into our Plymouth Hospital outpatient department, and our nurses, our theatre staff, because we closed theatres because we were doing different work then, the hospital was taken over by the NHS. We moved our theatre staff. Some went to work for Care UK, where they were treating NHS patients, and the others went into Derriford theatres. And this sort of mixing up that I could tell you endless stories about has really opened so many people's eyes to what we can do and how we can do it together. And my dream with my nursing head on is, well, actually with my clinical head on, any clinician, how great to have a part of your career in the NHS, part in the independent sector, join the army, go into the NHS, go back into. So each layer then adds something to the whole nurse that you are. And it isn't Sleepy Hollow in the independent sector. Now, we've had some really bad press lately, haven't we? You've probably seen it came to a head a couple of weeks ago that the government has spent many billions on commissioning care in the independent sector, and then we've had empty beds. And we're getting on between us for having treated 250,000 NHS patients. And that's quite substantial in that period of time. But the Health Service Journal is not going to tell you that, unfortunately. But we've lifted and shifted whole NHS services into our hospitals, or we have more often just simply our hospital taken over and we've become an NHS priority site. And the beauty of independent sector hospitals through the pandemic is it's much easier to keep a green pathway. We tend to be smaller units. We don't have an A&E, so we can keep our pathway protected as green. And so we've been a fantastic resource for cancer surgery, for chemotherapy, for all those different things that it was very difficult for a trust to maintain. And what we've also done is we've we've kind of done whatever that our buddy trust wanted us to do. And for some hospitals, that was 3 or 4 buddy trusts. So we've just arranged that we're going to take medical step down patients into our Haywards Heath Hospital, creating capacity in the trust for surgery. We will, we've got a 40-bed hospital near Southampton. We're taking medical step down patients for Southampton, again, so we can create capacity. Guildford, though, is doing surgery, and they're doing cancer surgery. So we're bespoking. Now, there have been some empty beds, and we've had some problems, but the problems we've had have tended to be where the trust either didn't need the help, or it was too complicated for that help to mobilise into us. So obviously I work in the independent sector, obviously I'm going to sell the idea, but can you imagine what that's felt like for our teams who have worked their socks off, and then they read in the paper that the independent sector's just been empty and having a bit of a laugh for the last year. So it's been a bit wounding, but actually our patients know that we were looking after the NHS. And really exciting news, and I'm hoping that this will kind of hit the press at some point, is that because our gyms are closed, we very quickly started to retrain and upskill, and we now have a pool of our physiologists, personal trainers, beauty therapists and so on, who have volunteered to mobilise into trusts. So they can then act as, a personal trainer knows their way around the human body, don't they? So they can support as sort of hospital support workers in a number of different roles, and we've given them the training up front to do that. And I had several of our nurses are working in Bart's ITU at the moment. I'm finding it quite grueling. I mean, it's grueling, but they haven't been in ITU for 10 years because they're building our Bart's hospital. But they've gone in and keeping in touch. And I heard a couple of, the very emotional, heartbreaking stories of looking after a patient. Anthony was looking after a patient, could see a nurse in tears on the other side of the ITU and could not get to that nurse to just say a few kind things, which is what we do, because he couldn't leave his patient. And that must be replicated all over the country. You must have stories like that. So we are now working with the NHS on how we can provide additional support through our emotional wellbeing champions, because we also have a big emotional wellbeing arm, through emotional wellbeing champions. And I floated it as an idea 2 nights ago, and when I read all of this, I said, right, what can we do about emotional wellbeing champions? Within half an hour, our emotional wellbeing lead sent me a list of about 10 things that we could do and just mobilize at pace. And I made a throwaway remark at the end, and I said, and what about our beauty therapists? This sounds like a time for some head and neck massages. And within 24 hours, I had an email from our lead at Bart saying the beauty therapist from our Surbiton Fitness and Wellbeing Centre is now going into Bart's. It's fantastic. But I do understand we're very lucky because we didn't have to seek permission. There was nothing complicated. Our relationship with Bart's was already in place, so we didn't have any red tape. And the bits of red tape we had, we just sort of said, oh, we'll sort that out later, and got on with it. But some of it, I've got some frustrations at the moment because I've got this workforce ready to go, but we now have to do different contracts with regions. And if the trust says they want us, and then we have to kind of negotiate over car parking, and then their lawyers have to have a look, and it takes a week, and then it takes another week, by which time the moment's gone. So I'm downloading some frustration at you, sorry. But I think my lesson here is where we've been able to mobilize quickly, it's been where we've had relationships, it's been where we've had conversations, it's been where we've known who we can pick the phone up to and say, what can we do about this? And I'll tell you who also helped to unblock things, Ruth May. So my colleague Davina, just the word got through to Ruth, and the next thing we know, we're on a call and Ruth's unblocked it. and that, you know, without any kind of stepping in from me. So yeah, relationships, big lesson. But, and I've gone wandering way off the topic, sorry Gemma, but coming right back, this is all about the NHS, the independent sector, the charity sector, because Nuffield Health is a charity. If we all work together, what awesome careers we can offer, what tremendous workforce benefits we can offer. And I'm really, really worried at the moment, and you will have these anecdotes as well, about nurses, when this is over or when this slows down, about nurses saying, you know what, I'm done. I was going to go for another couple of years, but actually I think I'm done now. And I'm so don't want that to happen. And a way we maybe can stop that happening is, yeah, you may be done with really tough, frontline, extreme care. The independent sector, the pace can be just that bit slower. It can be just that bit more flexible. It can be just that bit less complicated. So I'm really hoping that we can keep nurses in nursing, come to, not necessarily Nuffield, although obviously we're the best and marvellous, but come to find a role within nursing that is maybe just where you can decompress and fall back in love with the job, and where we can look after you, and then back into the NHS again. Because for me, it's about keeping nurses nursing. It's not either or, it's kind of and. So there you go, that's one of my things that I'm particularly passionate about, and I'd love to hear from any of you if you've got any ideas on how we can kind of build on that.
Let's open that up then. Do people have any views, thoughts, questions? Maggie, you've took yourself off mute, so I'm going to go with that as a subtle.
Hi Maggie, nice to see you.
I see you, Colonel Kefford. I'm really concerned about the whole emotional welfare of both nurses, and also now we've got lots of medics that are being deployed into hospitals. And my concern is the lack of context, particularly when you get to end of life care bits. You know, particularly, you know, our young medics are trained in that trauma space, and that's their head. They think we'll fix them and everybody will do their magic. And actually what we're happening in ITU now is we've got lots of people where we're getting to maximum treatment limits, and we're then phoning their family saying there's nothing we can do. And I see that Bez is on the phone as well, so as another ITU nurse, she'll understand that. You know, how do we skip up all these people? There was an article written and published last week about PTSD rates after the first wave in critical care staff in London, and actually we need to put that out to the respiratory high care, the theatre nurses that are working now in and also the non-trained, non-clinical people that are now in the space. And I don't know how to fix it, and I'm really glad that you also feel the same, because it worries me. And I got a message last night from somebody, a military nurse who's got an honorary contract at another hospital. Medics have arrived there. The trust don't really know what to do with them. They don't know who manages them. Their shifts are a bit ridiculous, and but I know it's disaster management, and it's not really a question. I think it's more of a reassurance for myself that you get it as well. And I think the next 2 years are going to be hard.
They are, Maggie. I think they're going to be really hard, but it's really interesting because some of a lot of the things I put in place very, very early on, and I say me, it may be that I said we need this, and then, you know, somebody else happened, but was from those insights and experiences from the army. And that, don't wait until it gets to PTSD after the battle's over. You can do an awful lot of emotional well-being support up front. And Gemma, this is very much your world, isn't it? And that's why we trained up emotional wellbeing champions, and we created a community of emotional wellbeing champions across all our hospitals, thanks to Zoom and what have you. So they're getting refreshed from their own community. They're getting the supervision, but they're also then getting their energy from this amazing impact that they've had. And there's nothing particularly you know, it's a mixture. It's housekeepers, it's healthcare assistants, all sorts of people. It's not clever. It's emotional first aid, really. and we've just gone for broke on that, Maggie.
And I think I wrote I'm not doing as much as I'd like to be able to do because I've got another job to do as well at the moment, but I'm in this afternoon in ITU, and after I did my shift last week, I wrote a reflection and I sent it to Colonel Sharon because I wanted to humanise the situation, because I think it's different where people are saying that facts and stats on that many cases are awful, that many deaths are awful, but I think that's different between you having the hands on the patient and it happening alongside you. And since I've shared it with a couple of other people, just because I think I'm on a bit of a mission at the moment to just raise the awareness of everything that's going on in hospitals, away from just press releases. So I'm spending a lot of time annoying people up the chain of command. So far not been told to shut up, so I'll keep going.
Maggie, if I can be of any assistance of that with my Colonel Commandant hat on, then just but and I think this is a really interesting point, is all the press. So the population is seeing this through the single lens of the press, and it's so much more than that. And taking a camera round a medical ward where it's just what the cameras want to see is all the fancy kit and the flashing lights and the machinery. But we've got this massive workforce, nurses and all clinicians who are facing tremendously stressful, difficult, upsetting, but they're not, what is it like for them if you then don't see what you're doing replicated more widely? It's that kind of, is there a loneliness involved in being, I'm on a medical ward and nobody's talking about me? We had and some of you may have heard me tell this story before, but our hospital in Woking, 35 beds, 13 years, nobody died in that hospital because it was a elective orthopedic, and believe it or not, assisted conception, very successful assisted conception hospital or unit. And they took on end-of-life palliative care, COVID positive patients, and Frimley A&E were decanting straight into our Woking hospital, as was Ashford St Peter's. And they had 35 deaths within a matter of days. And we mobilised into there a really big emotional wellbeing effort. But again, I'm so lucky we can do that. It was one phone call and, a few guys got in their cars and off they went. So Maggie, I don't know what the answer is, but I'm thinking about it all the time. And when I read a couple of these stories from our guys at Bart's, it was the emotional wellbeing champion bit that I just went straight into my head. Is can we put emotional wellbeing champions into each of these areas who are just have the basics, and then they spot somebody who can't get to their cup of coffee, so they can pick it up for them, or small things like that. But didn't at Frimley there was the first class lounge, wasn't there? Is that still going?
Not sure about Frimley. I know that Staff Fulford has put together different welfare areas and they've had lots of donations, but I don't think the lounges are there quite as they were to begin with.
As they were the first time. That's a shame.
I don't really know what's at Portsmouth because I'm not there enough. Bez would be able to. Bez Miranda's on the call. She might be able to tell us.
Just for one on Frimley, the lounges, first class lounge hasn't been set up yet, and like Phil Hodge says, they are setting up some, but they are looking to get back to what it was in the first wave.
Yeah.
And like Colonel Hodge says, Stafford was doing quite a lot to get donations in and get a place for people to actually get away from the clinical areas and decompress. So
yeah, it's a good word, that, Robbie, isn't it? Decompress, because I think that's so much what it's all about, is just that respite. And the other bit I'm worried about is when you've done your 12 hours, whether it is, end of life medical ward or critical care or wherever it's really hard. You maybe what you want to do is just get out of there and go home. And you miss that decompression opportunity where you're sharing your experiences and so on, and you go home, either maybe if you live on your own, you go home and there's nobody there, or you go home to a partner who's incredibly well intentioned but hasn't shared the experience. So you can talk it out, but you know you're talking to somebody who hasn't really who's using a frame of reference from what they've seen on the television. And all of this must be emotionally really challenging, or at least unhelpful. I don't know, but there really is this sort of emotional well-being echo, mental health echo to come, isn't there? Or at least it started already. Gemma, have you got any thoughts on this? Because it's your world.
Yeah. I guess my thoughts are I very much share your sentiments, Maggie and Carol, around preempting this, that we shouldn't be thinking about how we deal with people who have gone on to develop mental health problems as a result of the trauma that they've experienced, that we should recognise, and we should be doing this all the time, not around a pandemic, that the emotional demands of our role are significant, and we do need safe psychological spaces as routine to be able to process those things. And if we can nail that, if we can make that something that's just an accepted part of what we do as practitioners, then I think we would mitigate a lot of these more serious mental health issues that we're starting to see develop. So my big mantra is around clinical supervision, that isn't about management, monitoring, performance, those types of things. It is about safe space for reflection, support, to recognise that we hold huge emotional burden because of the nature of the work we do.
And then there's who looks after the leaders as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And then that's what my Florence WhatsApp group, a lot of it is peer support and looking after each other and giving advice to each other, as well as using the hive mind.
Absolutely, Maggie, because one of the things we're hearing is that people in positions like Carol are offering this to others and being a sounding board and holding a lot of that distress in others, but don't themselves necessarily have places to go to take it. So you're right, it doesn't stop. It's at every level, isn't it? Carol, could I ask you, building on from that, what you described there in terms of the transformation of the hospitals and the services Nuffield provides to be able to respond to the pandemic is absolutely mammoth, and it happened at speed. You know, it was something that you could never imagine before this. And I wonder if you could tell me, if you had to describe your approach to leadership during that time, what kind of method would you akin it to, or what do you think was the strategy in your mind there?
So I'm very lucky in that as a result of the foundation and my scholarship, my mentor introduced me to his coach, and who I now talk to regularly. And I was very focused when it was fairly clear that this was happening. And she gave me a really good tip, and she said, what 3 things do you want to be remembered for when you come out of the other side of this? And then remember those 3 things, and that's who you want to be over this time. So I couldn't get it down to 3, I got 6. So that was one bit, and I'll show you them to you in a minute. The other thing that I remembered was from doing the RADA module as part of my scholarship, and Johnny talking about just breathe, which I find incredibly difficult. So I have a post-it note here. I don't know if you can see that.
Yes.
And that's my plan. It's my second post-it note because the first one fell off eventually. Now, what's interesting, and again, this is where I've drawn on my army experiences, and it's been one of the challenges of being at Nuffield Health, because we've got 31 hospitals and many more clinics and so on, is how do I stay visible when one of my hospitals is in Glasgow, another one's in Ipswich, another one's in Cardiff, and another one's in Plymouth? You know, how do I cover that area? And again, this was the it's something that we experience in the army or in the military, is that how do you stay connected and visible over a vast area? So I just adopted my visibility was, I have all our hospital matrons and their clinical leaders, if it's optional. We have a call once a week. So it's one of my team chairs it. I'm always there. I'll always say something. And sometimes it's a transmission of information. Sometimes it's a conversation. Sometimes I have a Dame Yvonne joined us this week, Gemma. Ruth May's joined us. And other times, depending on where the heat is, where in this sort of through the pandemic, other times I've tried to say a few reasonably encouraging or inspiring things to people. So there's that visibility. Phone calls, I ring people up all the time because I don't like emails. I like talking to people. I think the visibility's come through. I found online a picture of the virus and a finger going like that, sort of flicking the virus away. So I use an online card making, so I can type it's called Touch Note, you probably know about it. So I type a message and send it on that card. So I send that to, if I hear a great story about somebody who's gone the extra mile, I send it routine. I'll send it when, a hospital's tipping into surge, or I just send it because it's time to. I sent all the matrons gin and chocolates, sort of as we were off the worst, coming off, it was probably about, after we were about 2 or 3 months in, I sent them all hand cream a few months later. So I think there's lots of little tricks. My team, I mean, none of this is me on my own. It's really, I do all of this through my senior leadership team. So we have a regional setup. So my team, who I'm very, very close to and talk to most days, they have weekly or now fortnightly and then back to weekly welfare calls with the matrons, where it's got nothing to do with transmission of information. It's supervision, it's decompression, it's a half an hour or an hour on Zoom. So it's finding all these different ways of people knowing that you're there. So, I can't be visible in the real sense, although the very second lockdown was, the very second I was allowed out, I was out, but still, I still haven't been to Glasgow, for example. So I think, so that was the visible bit. Talking, Maggie, there about the leaders and who's looking after the leaders and so on, it takes huge energy, doesn't it? You'll all know this. Staying calm and staying steady when actually you want to be honest is that really takes some digging deep sometimes. And so that's where I've needed to needed to have it on a post-it note to remind me not to get wound up, because it's been a big part of my role, I feel, is to absorb other people's anxieties and so on. And then I've needed this reminder to kind of be rational and pragmatic. That's about being proportionate. We can't do everything. We can't produce massive, great detailed reports. We haven't got time. We just have to completely change, stay proportionate, really pragmatic. What can we do here? And the other bit is about being decisive, and we learn this in leadership, don't we, about there's a time for conversation and there's a time to just say this is what we need to do, and when people welcome that, right, this is what we need to do, I call it my chief nurse says moment. Chief nurse says, I'm just going to do it. And you could a little bit of insight and skill, and you can see when somebody just wants to be told as opposed to, right, let's all have a long conversation. So I can't, that's it. I've just muddled through, Gemma, really, me and my post-it note.
Amazing. All those profound statements you just made in those last few minutes, Carolyn, you've so humble, describe it as me and my post-it note. I love it. So any other questions from other people now? I'll open it back up there. Thoughts, reflections?
Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry. I'll go to Robbie first, and then to you, Jen.
Thank you very much. Just wondering, we're looking at all the well-being and things we can implement now during the pandemic, and rightly so, because that's the closest crocodile to the boat. However, what is there any plans, or do you think we should be looking at the recovery phase? You know, when the pandemic is over and people have got the ability to get out, do things, socialize more, do you think we should be looking to see what we're doing there? You know, identifying that once this finishes, we'll have like a day out, or we'll have this or whatever, to give people that optimism that it will come to an end at some point. Yeah. And I just wondered what your thoughts are around that.
Robbie, I think you're absolutely right. Because, you know, we kind of fell into this because it all happened so quickly. We shouldn't fall out of it. We should have a bit of a plan. And when we're able to mobilise that, who, you know, still a little bit uncertain, isn't it? But it's interesting you talk about having a day out. I'm in the process. They don't know it yet, so don't tell them. I'm in the process of thinking through what me and my immediate team are going to do to celebrate. My organisation is planning a big leaders event where we will, you know, and that'll be the gym leaders, the hospital leaders, everywhere, just all. That'll probably be about 400 people, but we'll get together and we'll have a proper party. I'm planning that my next matrons face-to-face event will be, it'll be fun from beginning to end. We're not going to have any kind of here's an update on I don't know, mental health, or here's an update on regulation. What we're going to do is just have fun, just get a bit self-indulgent for a while, because what I really want people to do when we can get them together and have a few beers is talk to each other about their experiences. I want to trigger those conversations without it being, right, we're all going to sit in a nice circle now and talk about our experiences. It's that kind, you know, like the fire brigade do it, don't they? They all sit around a table and have a cup of tea after they've been out in a shout. So it's kind of a big version of that. So there's a little bit of just talking it through, celebrating. But I think we need to be a bit more formal than that as well. We need to have our eyes and ears open, and again, this is you know, the emotional well-being allies, just being conscious that it isn't over for a lot of people. There's an awful lot of processing to do. And because I'm very old, I first joined the army when the Falklands War was on. We weren't as good on the emotional and mental health side of things then as we have eventually got a lot better. But I very well remember the soldiers who'd been through this intense experience in Navy coming back, and those who flew in then were, isn't this great, back to your families, and everybody expected everybody to be so happy and not to have any problems because they were back at home and eating steak again. How marvellous. Of course, they had tremendous problems. The people who didn't have the problems to anything like the same extent were the guys and women, men and women, who came back by ship because they'd got a couple of weeks with their peers, with their colleagues, with the shared experience, just, you know, partying every night. They didn't have to do anything other than just talk to each other and have probably more than a few beers. So isn't that interesting? How do we replicate that? Because if we make this lazy and faulty assumption, well, everybody will be all right because there's nothing to worry about anymore, I think we'll fall over. We've got to formalise a new normal somehow. Yeah. But isn't it great we're talking about it now?
Yeah, sorry to step in, but I think it is great that we're talking about it. I think that, as you've kind of alluded to, the army, the military, we're set up to regularly hold clinical supervision. We're getting used to decompression at times of stress, and this is basically an op for everyone, isn't it? Everyone's ready to move around the country, and everyone's flat out working. And then often the people in the military I worry about are the guys going back to the block in that one room, and then some of them having family in a completely different area of the country that, you know, they're separated from family. So we do have that. But it's our NHS colleagues that I think, I can only really speak to the trust that I'm in, that don't appear to have a lot of that support built in, and perhaps don't have that relationship between their leaders and the guys who are on the ground. And you've got people working in completely different areas, so their immediate managers just don't know what they're going through. But yeah, I hope that we will look after our guys. And there's a lot of military leaders on this call that I know will. But yeah, I do worry about those people we work alongside that just don't have that access that we are privileged to have.
So just going on from that, if I may, I completely agree, and I think it's our NHS colleagues, like you said there, the army will be quite swept up with it. We'll get AT, we'll get some clinical supervision, we'll get all that sort of stuff, but our civilian colleagues will just be expected to carry on as normal, and there won't be a demarcation of COVID ending and then normal life continuing. It'll just be, this is just normal now, and they won't have that ability to compartmentalize the COVID pandemic and be able to get rid of all their thoughts, their feelings, and all that away from it. And they won't be given the opportunity, because it'll be straight back to, like we saw after the first wave was stopped, people came back into A&E. A&E was quiet during the COVID pandemic, except for COVID people. As soon as you release sanctions, A&E filled up again, and people just treated the NHS as it was prior to the COVID. So I don't think they're going to get any respite in between. So I think as leaders, we need to enforce that respite and try and work with bottom to top, top to bottom, in making sure that they do get some downtime, they get some nice things to do, they get some support, whether it's mental health support or whether it's just a pat on the shoulder, that sort of thing. So I just worry that there is not going to be a demarcation for certain people in certain places.
Robbie, I agree. So what do we do about it? Because we're all leaders. Fumi, what's your experience?
Oh, hello, hi.
Hi.
Yeah, oh yeah, okay. Because what you're saying about the well-being, honestly, we did have something like that, but it was like more like in your break time, you have to go there where there's staff around. But because I'm in A&E, I didn't get that opportunity to leave those patients to go there and have a chat and have a nice cup of coffee. And I was unlucky because I started my A&E job the very first in March when the COVID had that outbreak.
Yes.
So when I was coming in one day, they were like, "You're going to be working on isolation." I'm like, right, where do I go? I called my sister. I said, if I come out alive, I'll thank God, because I don't know, because by that time, even if I'm in NENS, I thought with working people with COVID, you're going to die anyway, because we didn't know what to do. I didn't know what the would look like. And yeah, I said to my sister, I don't know if I'm going to do it, because they're just sending me there. There was no kind of like a counseling of something like, okay, you're going to work there, it's going to be like this. I didn't get that. It's just like a push. You go in there, you're going to work on isolation on that day. So really, I felt like, God, this is the end of me. I was like, I can't run, I can't do anything, but I have to go there. Whatever I'm going to face is what I'm going to face. But I managed to work that shift out and stuff like that. But still, I really felt like when I got into my car, I just cried. And I was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Why did I start this job? Why did it happen to me? And things like that. And as time goes on, I don't blame anyone, because no one had a clue what was happening. There was nothing in place, because everything was decided on the day we're going to attend these places in A&E, because it was used to be a minors where you just see people there like for a couple of hours and then they go home. So, and then as time goes on, it was like stress after stress, stress after stress. It didn't get any better. I don't think it did until maybe like just get self-confidence, like I can do this, I'm just gonna be like this. And I think you just try and work yourself out until you find your own way that works best for you. So as time goes on, and then we came like we had a quietness as well, because anyway we did have coffees and stuff, and some volunteers coming to give us coffees at that time. But even that time, you like, can I take off my mask and drink this coffee, or do I need to take everything off? Do I need to have a shower before I drink? And I think we got more dehydrated by then. You can't drink, you're scared, you can't touch yourself and things like that. It was really difficult time. And then we went quiet when you like kind of thought we conquered the COVID, but it came again. We started again with this pandemic. It came again, and I can't talk about emotions and things that I saw happening there and all that stuff, because I think everyone experienced the same thing. So I'm talking about this wave now. It kind of like it cooled off, like maybe we had that time, but even that time, we're only like told to go to the spiritual clinics, like there, if you can take yourself and things. But we didn't have that like thing like it's onto you, like it's given to you. It's like you taking yourself. And then sometimes I feel like, oh, okay, then I've got family, maybe I can talk to my family and things like that. And then sometimes, because you know those emotions, they come. Like maybe today, I'm just going to feel it. Like now, if something happens to that patient, it's going to be today. Then I feel like I'm okay. And then I see another patient, that thing comes again. Yeah. So like myself, I don't know, when do I need that help? Do I need it now, or do I need later? So I don't know when to seek that help. I don't know if it makes sense. But I know those emotions are still here. Like now you're asking me, I still feel emotional. I feel like I can really like go again. And I feel, oh my God, it's coming back now again. So I don't know the way forward, like we do need support, and I don't know how we can endorse it, because people are busy. People are like A&E, it's all about numbers, you know, that like, oh, you know, we're preaching, we need this, about preach, it's about what, it's not about anything else, about to avoid that preach. Like the past few weeks, 3 weeks ago, we're treating people in the ambulances. We're meant to be taking the treatment in the ambulances, because the ambulances were queuing outside. We used the corridor until we used the other side of the corridor. We had lots of arrests. We lost someone in the corridor and things like that. So we said, okay, stop the corridors. Let's do it in the ambulances. I don't even know. It's just going on and on. So I don't know, like when, and then the only scary part again, I don't think we're going to have nurses in the NHS. I think because they try to put up the money and say, okay, because we're desperate, let's just give this £50 or how much an hour. I don't know how much was it actually, but no one turned up, because it's not about money now. It's about people, they are emotional, they can't handle it. But being at home is best thing. Like if you finish your shift, you go home, coming back, as long as I'm off tomorrow, I do care. But I don't care in a way, because I can't experience it again. I can't keep on filing this thing in my diary all the time. I don't want this diary to fill up with these sad things in my life. So even if I know my colleagues are striking, I know they're striking, I wish I could help. What about me as well? And then I know they are my patient. I said, yeah, I'm accountable for them. I care. I did NMC says this and that. But at the end, when I come back, still I'm alone. I don't have that person again to be patting my shoulder and say, okay, it's going to be okay, whatsoever. It's not like that. So I don't know. That's how it is with my own experience. So I really feel like I don't know how the NHS is going to be in the next coming years or something like that, because nurses, we're going to lose them. It's not what some of them, they say, this is not what I signed up for. I signed up for this, but this is happening. So I think the heat is still building up.
Yes.
So
I'm sure it is. I'm sure.
And just listening to your story there, Femi, I think one of the things that we can do by you sharing your story and listening to the experiences of others who have dealt with these kinds of traumatic events through their military careers is we can share this with those that need to hear it. And so I really do appreciate you giving us that very personal account there, because, you know, now we can take this to the networks, as Carol said, that the FNF have, and make sure that they can hear these things. So I do really appreciate appreciate you sharing that with us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you for me. I mean, it just brings it to life again, doesn't it? Lived experiences and so on. So,
Absolutely.
you know, we're all leaders,
Yeah.
and we have our needs as leaders, but we also have our part to play as leaders, don't we? And I think it's a really interesting thing to try and integrate and to balance, so that we are part of the solution, having recognised that there is this problem, because it doesn't just stop and we'll all be happy. It's a long legacy. Jen, I'm sorry, were you going to say something earlier?
Yeah, Jen's got a question for you, Carol.
It was not a question. Thank you, Ken or Kefford. From what everyone's been saying and what Fumi's been saying, and from what one officer Beach was saying, it just seems like there's a feeling of guilt, which is quite unfair that everyone's had that. So yesterday we had a mental health day at my unit at JHG South for a morning, and they said, how is everyone feeling? And some people were saying, oh, you're tired, knackered, because, you know, they're working long hours. But the others was just saying guilty, and they said, well, guilty that they're not doing as much as their NHS colleagues are doing. We get a military once a week, whereas they don't, and they just felt like that type of guilt. And from hearing, you know, Fumi talk, everyone who isn't an ITU nurse or ED nurse seems like, oh, we're not doing as much as we can, which is really hard and difficult. And I know other colleagues and people who aren't in this cap badge and other cap badges who are just stuck at home, they're feeling the guilt. And I think for all nurses, it doesn't matter where you're working. As long as you're working, you are doing something. You know, even doing surgical, you're working in surgery and you feel, oh, I'm not treating COVID patients. It doesn't mean that you're not working as hard, but definitely clearly the ITU nurses, the ED nurses, they are really having a tough time. And I'm not saying they're not, but it's just quite clear from yesterday and today that everyone is feeling that guilt, and going home after a shift, you're feeling guilty for leaving the nurses in the lurch, feeling guilty that the patients aren't getting optimum care because of staffing. So I think that's a big problem for all nurses at the moment, and it's hard to combat. But I think, again, clinical supervision and support will allow people to discuss it.
Jen, it's interesting you say that. My view, and I've been doing ITU for 25 years, is the fact actually the ward nurses have it a lot worse than probably even in ITU. Yes, there's a lot of deaths going on in ITU, but in the wards as well. And what we don't get in the ITU is you don't end up with that relationship, speaking to the patient and getting to know them, and then becoming that person and that personality. And same with ED, where you have that relationship with people. And I think that helps probably critical care nurses, because you can detach from it a little bit. Yes, it's still awful, but it's just as awful in the ward. And I don't think there's anybody that's working in ITU that thinks that anybody else elsewhere is getting an easier time of it.
Yeah. Isn't this really interesting though? Because it would be so easy to assume, wouldn't it, that there was some kind of hierarchy of involvement or hierarchy of awfulness. And whatever you're doing, whatever your involvement, however technical, whatever, we're all under pressure for different reasons, and we're all under pressure. And I think, Jen, that's a really useful and helpful reminder, is that we're all shouldering something, and we don't need to get into that kind of what did you do in the war, daddy kind of guilt over having had a slightly easier time or not having, because golly, where can it end? You know, I clearly live in quite a nice house in a nice place, and I've done most of this from exactly where I'm sitting now. So, you know, yes, I haven't been a sharp end. That's kind of interesting and different. And we have got people, but it worries me to think that people would feel that their contribution was somehow lesser than somebody else. But of course, we're all going to be comparing ourselves as to whether it was worse or better. And I'll bet everybody is feeling a mix of guilt and a mix of layered in over all the other things that are going on. But it's a really good It's a really good point, Jen. It's something else to watch out for, isn't it? It's something else. I'm thinking out loud here, but you know, when I said about making that assumption that everybody's going to be all right because we don't have to worry about the pandemic anymore, we could easily be making assumptions about our colleagues and thinking, well, they'll be all right because they were only on the medical ward and nothing, you know, that wasn't that technical. But they've got all these other issues that they're dealing with. So, you know, everybody's carrying something, aren't they? And it's really important we're conscious of that. So and of course, layered in with this one is all the personal and family anxiety. The threat is to we're all carrying that threat to each of us personally and to our families, our loved ones, people who are working on the front line but have also lost family or are worried about their family. It's an incredible layering in of complicated horribleness. The other thing that struck me, it was only a couple of weeks ago, is, you know, if you're, as some of you have done, or probably most of you have done, is deployed onto a, you know, if it's a war, if it is a natural disaster, all of those things have a boundary around them, don't they? So the Ebola crisis, there was a boundary. If you walked far enough in a particular direction, you would get to a place where there was no Ebola. It's not like that with the pandemic, is there? There is literally no escape. And that makes it rather odd as well.
Absolutely. Totally unique circumstances that we're dealing with, and it's that a sense of the endurance test now, isn't it? That's the you know, we're all capable of managing a crisis, and adrenaline gets us through that. But now we're in a stage where this is a sustained. As I've heard people say, it's a race against the vaccine and the virus at this point. So, Carol, just to take us onto a slightly different focus for a while, I wondered if you would mind sharing with us some of those moments through your career where you've either identified a real role model that's made an impact on you, or there's been a moment where you've thought, this is the type of leader that I want to be, and I've nailed it now. Those kind of moments. I wonder if you could give us some.
Certainly, yes, I can conjure them up very quickly. The problem I'm going to have is if I talk about all my role models, I'll end up feeling completely inadequate because I don't think I've actually. But yes, so when I was a student nurse at the Radcliffe Infirmary, the old hospital in Oxford, I was in my third year, and there was a staff nurse called Annie, and there was just something about Annie that she was. She had this caring plus something about her, and it's really hard to quantify. And I can remember after a couple of days on that ward thinking, that is who I want to be as a staff nurse. And the other thing that really struck me was she was incredibly respectful of all her colleagues and of all of us. So I was used to quite a hierarchical approach, but the way she spoke on the phone, the way she said her pleases and thank yous, it was never creepy. She was great fun, but there was just something about Annie and her ability. So she stuck with me, and I still conjure her up sometimes. There was a ward sister when I worked in Manchester who, and I've talked about this before, just gave me a shove. And I stick with her in my mind as to when somebody else is wobbling about shall I, shan't I, is that it's my job to get in there and say, right, let me kind of take whatever rocks you've got in your shoes out, and let's give you a bit of a push so that you do actually make this jump into something that's a bit scary. So that was Lynn, and I've carried her with me. The very, very first day I joined the army, my instructor, awesome, absolutely awesome. And again, she managed to conjure up. She was great fun. She was smart. She did everything properly, but she didn't ever take herself too seriously. And it was that mix of being amazingly competent and wearing it very lightly that has really, again, I've carried thoughts of her with me. And she went right the way through. She had a really stellar career, but without ever appearing to push anything. And from the other really critical lesson I learned from her was that it's okay not to know everything, and it's okay to big up all those people around you, quite often quite a lot junior to you, and to, you know, ring somebody up and say, I haven't the foggiest idea what these guys are talking about, could you please talk me through it? And as a relatively junior officer, having a senior officer ring me up and say, Carol, can you just, I don't know what's going on here, the way it made me feel was just amazing. But up until that point, my assumption was that if I'd rung somebody up and said, I've no idea what's going on, that I would be viewed as weak and inadequate and ill-informed and so on. And it was quite the opposite. So that was a really big lesson. And then as I've gone on, I've then started to, I suppose, have more insight into some of our current leaders who I find incredibly inspiring, and who have also don't seem to have had this, right, now I'm a junior nurse and eventually I want to be way up there and I want to be incredible. What they've done is they've made choices as they've gone. And when Ruth May came to spoke to our matrons on a call a few months ago, and she described her career, and the advice she gave was choose the people you want to work with. So look at the job, but actually look at the people you'll be working with and choose them. And I thought that, you know, on so many levels, that's a really, really interesting piece of advice, which coupled with another friend, with a friend, somebody I did my nurse training with, who has had and still has a bit of a stellar career. And she said, do you want to be offered the job or do you want to do it? And I think about that. If you know, there's this very exciting next layer, maybe, you know, big job and it sounds impressive and it's all a bit glamorous or whatever. Being offered it's great, but actually when you get there, it might not be that something you want to do. So I think that do you want to do the job or do you just want to be offered it is interesting, and I think that choose the people you want to work with is interesting. So that's my immediate download. There are many others, but those are my where I can think of somebody and I can think of what they taught me.
And what about those moments where you think perhaps I've become a role model to others?
Oh my goodness, Gemma.
Quick cringy question for people to talk about these.
Question.
On the spot.
I don't, okay, so what, I guess that's the what do others say about me question, yeah. Isn't it? I think what I'm told, because I'm a very sort of active gatherer of feedback, what I'm told is that or what's appreciated about me is my enthusiasm and my energy, what's the word, because somebody said it to me the other day and I can't remember, but my the fact that I'm nice. I'm kind of there's people like me being around, and I think that, you know, I'm pleased by that, and when somebody says that I'd inspired them to make a move, which people do say to me from time to time, then, you know, that's something that gives me a lot of satisfaction, is that so I like to be able to give people a hand up or a leg up whenever I can.
Fantastic, thank you so much. So I'm going to draw our session to a close now. I think as you've been talking, I've been making some notes around the key points that I'll take away, and I'm sure that others on the call will be thinking the same. You've really made me think that statement that you said a few times of we are all leaders, and I think that that's something that I always need to remind myself of, that I have influence, that I have power in my role, and that I can use what we learn all together constantly and to make the differences that we've described are needed today.
It's you, it's not your job.
Exactly. It absolutely is. And there's a motivation and a drive to do that based on the stories that we've heard. So that's fabulous. I also was thinking about how you talked around health systems as well, and that people don't necessarily consider the private sector within that system, and part of your mission is to challenge that. And I love the idea of the different ways that nurses could move through their career pathway, utilising the benefits of those different systems so they can stay in nursing, which is just so revolutionary actually to many people to think in that way. So I loved that. And then I found our whole conversation around the emotional labour of the role, particularly now in the pandemic, but reminding ourselves that this is the nature of the work that we do, and we have to get this right. If we can't use the pandemic to really make those support structures a sustainable part of what we are offered as healthcare professionals, then we've missed an opportunity there, because you're right, we will just return back to normal, and normal will never be normal again after this. So some really key messages I think that will stay with me, and reflections to take forward. So thank you so much for your time, Carol, and thanks everyone in the audience.
Thank you for yours. It's your time's at a premium. All of you guys, huge thanks, all of you. You know, I mean, what you're doing is it's really extraordinary. Really extraordinary.
Phenomenal. And we hopefully you'll get a chance to dial into future ones of these events and carry on these conversations. Do drop us a line and let us know who you'd be interested to talk to, and we'll utilise our collective networks and try and put those wish lists together. So keep in contact with us, and great to see you all. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Great to see you. Thanks a lot.